Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded an eco-conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, I don't just make pottery, I make resources such as books and courses for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about me sharing everything I've learned with you, and I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, so before we get on with the episode, I wanted to tell you about two completely free guides that I've made just for you about pottery. And the first guide is called How to Make a Pottery Glaze. So if you've ever been curious about how to make your own pottery glaze, this guide will show you exactly how to make your own glaze from start to finish. It tells you all the ingredients you need. It tells you step by step how to make the glaze, how to stay safe when glaze making, and it's got a stoneware glaze recipe in there. And if you've been curious about how to fire pottery, I have also made a guide on electric kiln firing. So this guide will tell you all the different terms that's used in like kiln firing, and what they mean, and it also takes you through the exact firing schedule that I use to do my bisque firing and also stoneware glaze firing. So it's got all the temperatures in there, all the timings in there, and both of these guides are available from the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's get on with the episode. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking to you about some things which are not made for the pottery industry, so like equipment and stuff that are kind of from other industries, but that I have been using in my work that are amazing and so helpful, and I wanted to share them with you, in case you found them helpful too, because quite often, the pottery industry it's a bit smaller first of all than other industries, isn't it? The handmade pottery industry is smaller than, say, the DIY industry, but quite often we're doing similar processes. So if we can utilize equipment that is made for the DIY or construction industry, we can use those in our work, or say like the catering industry or something, we can use those in our work. And quite often we need the same function performing basically than professionals in those other industries. And why not use equipment from those other industries, instead of specialist pottery equipment might not actually exist for the use we need. So throughout my time as a potter, I found these particular pieces of equipment so helpful, so useful, and I just really wanted to share them with you in case you had the same sort of experience basically. And there's actually so many of them. I've realised I started writing them down, and I realised there were so many things that I use which are not really necessarily for pottery per se, but I use them every day, that I've had to actually split this into 2 episodes, because I was like, I don't just be listing all these things out, and I thought let's split it into 2 episodes so it's not just one giant gargantuan list of equipment. Okay, so let's get started. So we'll do the first 1 to 8 in this episode, and then we'll do the next lot in another episode, the next time's episode. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so this is kind of in no particular order. And let's start with one of the most absolutely useful basic things that potters, will always need until the end of time, and that's a sponge. And this sponge that I'm holding up, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm actually holding up a Cellulose Decorators sponge, because Cellulose Decorator sponges are so good. They're made for people wallpapering, wiping sort of sugar soap on the wall, before they paint and stuff. And they're very big, which is just what you need in pottery. Sometimes, for wiping down like tables, floors, wiping equipment. And they're also made of cellulose, which is great because cellulose is biodegradable. It's made of wood fibers. So yeah, decorator sponges, really brilliant. Just what they're quite soft as well. So it's just what you need in a sponge for pottery. I definitely recommend them. This one I'm holding up is still very big, but it's actually been cut in half. So Decorators cellulose sponges are actually giant. So they're really good. They're really good value as well. You can chop them up into smaller bits. And I just got that from the hardware shop, basically. Okay, let's move on to the next item. The next item is a microfiber cloth. So you can just get these from like the supermarket in like the cleaning department and stuff. And I've just found microfiber cloths so good. They're very good at cleaning. They dry very quickly. And again, I use them on a daily basis for like cleaning tools, equipment, like my hands, like wiping the floor, wiping tables. It's really important to keep your pottery area clean so you don't get like clay dust and stuff. So yeah, microfiber cloths, they're very durable, they're very cheap, they're really good at cleaning, and I would definitely recommend them for pottery. Okay, so the next piece of equipment is actually kind of in the same kind of DIY kind of line, and it's a plasterer's bucket. So when I was so I do quite a lot of slip casting, which means that I need to make up like quite large amounts of like liquid clay, and liquid clay is really, really heavy, and so I need very strong equipment to be able to like hold large quantities of slip that I'm making up. It needs to be like held in a very strong container because I'm going to be like mixing it with sometimes with electrical equipment, which we'll move on to in a minute. And so, you need a very strong bucket basically to do that in. And so, I was thinking to myself, well, where could I find a really, really strong bucket? That's affordable. And then I suddenly realized that, making large quantities of, very heavy substance is something that like plasterers would use, plasterers need to do on a daily basis. And so I thought, oh, maybe they have a special sort of plasterer's bucket, and they actually do have a special plasterer's bucket. So from the DIY shop, it was about £8, and it is it's a very big bucket. It's very tall. It's very, very strong, and it's made of kind of like a sort of clear white plastic. But that was actually like a much, much cheaper option than if I'd got a sort of specialist like slip bucket. But it's actually extremely strong and really affordable. So that was from the DIY shop again. So yeah, plasterer's mixing bucket, I would really recommend. Okay, so in a similar vein, I've actually, I've gone through different iterations of like trying to make up slip. And at first I've used, various different things. I've tried to like kind of hand stir it. I've tried to kind of like, use kind of catering blenders and stuff to make it. And none of those things have been as effective. It's a very difficult thing to make because, it needs a lot of stirring, and you need a very, sort of heavy duty piece of like industrial equipment to be able to like, mix your slip for you, or you need a lot of time on your hands to hand mix it. And why hand mix slip when you can potentially, get a machine to mix it for you? So what I looked into was, so you can actually get special slip mixers. I think they're called a blunger, I think. I've never been quite sure how to pronounce that word actually, but I've seen them in the like pottery suppliers, and they can be really, really expensive. So they're very specialist piece of equipment because you can just set them up and you can set them to run, and they'll just mix it for you, and they're kind of like free, sort of freestanding. You can set them maybe like over a bucket or something. So if you're making slip like loads and loads and loads, you might want to have that, or if you work in a kind of studio pottery that's like got lots of people using it, community based one or something, that might be something that the pottery wants to invest in. But I just thought, I don't think I can make the financial commitment to get that specialist piece of pottery equipment. So what I did instead was I looked again into the DIY like construction industry, and they use routinely a thing called a paddle mixer, and it's essentially like a massive stick blender that you plug in. So it's very they can be like really they're built for like very mixing very a lot and very strong sort of very viscous substances, like plaster on a daily basis. So they're very hard wearing. So, and they're also quite cheap, compared to like the specialist kind of pottery version. So yeah, so I got one. So my one is like a paddle mixer that's kind of like, built for kind of people working in construction, mixing up plaster, mixing up mortar. And, I've been using it to mix up my slip, and it is so good. So basically I just hold on to it, and in the slip bucket I just mix it up in the slip bucket, and just like there's a button that you can kind of like switch it on to, so it kind of just stays on, and you can just like and like you're mixing it up, mixing all the ingredients together, and it works really well. If anything, it works a bit too well. It's a little bit too kind of like well mixing for the kind of the use I need, so I have to kind of sometimes like slow it down a little bit. It's a bit I think it's just it's made for the construction industry basically. So I'd really recommend that. I'd recommend a paddle mixer if you're going to be mixing up any kind of clay or slip or anything. And they're very easy to clean as well. You can kind of, what I do is I just dip it in a bucket of water and then switch it on, and then it kind of cleans it itself, because it's like whisking the water and it whisks all the clay off of it, and then I kind of just sponge it down a little bit after that as well. Okay, great. So we've done those, and then okay, so again, this is kind of on the slip casting note, like what I actually do is I make my own plaster molds. I make 1 part plaster molds for slip casting, and I do things like I love slip casting because it enables you to kind of basically make a very similar looking piece over and over again, and you can put loads of creativity into the kind of like the decoration of it and the glazing of it and stuff. But to make the mold in the first place, I've been using quite a lot of like non-pottery equipment. So the first thing to say is that when I cast, you basically, to make a mold, you need to cast a shape. And what I've been doing is I've been looking for shapes kind of in the kind of catering industry, or sometimes in charity shops, or I've been looking for things that I can cast into a plaster mold to kind of like make like you're essentially making the impression of the outside shape of something. So if you imagine like a bowl, you're making the kind of outside shape of the bowl, into the plaster mold. You're casting a kind of depression of the outside profile of something. So I think I've said this on a previous episode, but once you start slip casting, once you start like making molds that you want to once you start making plaster molds, you can't stop looking at things in the same way. You're basically thinking like, oh, is that like, could I cast that? Like when you go to like the supermarket and stuff, you're like, oh, that would make a really good plaster mold, or oh, I love the profile of that bowl and stuff. And it's like really hard just to like look at like bowls and dishes normally. But what I've been doing is using metal dishes to cast with, and my absolute top favourites are enamel pie dishes. So you can get enamel pie dishes in like so many different sizes. So yeah, they're so good because not only do they come in like loads and loads of different sizes, so they kind of like can cater for like whatever you want to make basically. If whatever mold you want to make, there's probably an enamel dish that that fits the profile. But they're also non-porous, which is really important for when you're making a mold in plaster, because the plaster can stick to the thing you're casting if it's porous at all, unless you use loads of like this thing called mold maker's size, which makes the thing you're casting kind of like non-stick to the plaster. But if you're casting something that's non-porous, that's shiny, then you can, generally speaking, separate it from the plaster mold after you've cast it. So like the really good thing as well about like metal dishes, casting metal dishes, is they've got an ever so slight bit of give in them. So what quite often happens is when you cast when you've made a plaster mold and you're trying to separate the dish from the plaster block at the end, a very, very difficult to separate kind of situation happens because there's a very strong airlock between the dish and the plaster. So if you can kind of, what I sometimes do is just like knock it with a rolling pin, and then it kind of like breaks that airlock. And so if you have, metal dishes are great like that because they won't like shatter or anything. They just kind of, they can take a bit of being bashed with a rolling pin, and then they just like come out of the mold, and it's great. It's all good. So yeah, so those like enamel dishes I would really recommend if you wanted to try making a plaster mold to do, slip casting, or to do, you can use them for a press mold as well. If you want to, experiment with making your own plaster mold, I would really recommend metal dishes, the cast. They're kind of like the thing I found the easiest to make a mold with. Okay, so on that note as well, actually, the next thing is cooking oil. So I actually, when I'm making a plaster mold, I actually put cooking oil, just a teeny weeny bit, and I actually use sesame oil because it's such a light oil. I just get a piece of kitchen roll and I just rub it over, and I just put that on the outside of the dish before I pour the plaster over it. And that again just really helps to separate the whatever you're casting, the dish, from the plaster mold at the end. So yeah, that's my absolute top tip. Like, you don't necessarily need to use that specialist kind of mold maker's size that some potters use. Well, you would probably need to use mold maker size if you were casting something very porous, because then you paint like lots and lots of layers of mold maker size like on your porous thing. But if you're not casting something porous, if you're casting something like nice and smooth and non-porous, then you can just use a little bit of oil, a little bit of cooking oil. You could even use vegetable oil or something, and you brush a little tiny bit of sesame oil on. And it really does help the plaster to come off, to separate from the thing you're casting. Great, okay, so right, on that note, on the same note of kind of slip casting and stuff, I wanted to tell you about paper clay. Okay, so I actually use, so you might have heard me talk about paper clay before, and paper clay is like this absolutely magical substance, and essentially all it involves is adding paper fibers, so cellulose fibers, in some capacity. So it could be like newspaper, it could be like paper, it could even be like tissue, any kind of recycled paper or something. Some people even use kind of like, you can even use like flaxseed, flax plant fibers, not the seed, the plant. You can buy commercial clay as well with these fibers in as well. So what I use is I actually use kitchen roll that's made of bamboo. So I take sheets of kitchen roll, which is obviously intended for kitchen roll, and I basically blend it into a kind of mush, into a pulp, back into a pulp with some water. Then I take the water out and then I add it to my casting slip, and it makes the slip really, really strong, and it is so good, and it stops cracking, and it enables you to, it stops kind of accidental breakages at the greenware stage, because the greenware is so strong. I wouldn't say it 100% stops breakages, obviously if you dropped your pot and stuff, but when you accidentally knock a pot and it breaks, it makes pots so strong that it's harder to accidentally break them, basically. So adding paper to clay, you can add it as well to clay that you're actually just making stuff with. If you're hand building something, you can knead in some paper pulp, and it will make your clay very, very strong, which is so good if you're hand building something that needs a lot of strength. Paper clay is so good. So yeah, I would really recommend bamboo kitchen roll. It is so good. It's another thing actually that paper clay does is it makes greenware so strong that it can actually be glazed before it's bisque fired, which is like a whole nother story, but it's called raw glazing. And it's this amazing thing where basically you can just put a glaze straight on a greenware pot before it's been fired at all, and it will you can fire it straight up to stoneware temperatures. and it will, it will be able to take that glaze. It won't disintegrate under the kind of being re-wetted by the glaze, because it's so strong because of those paper fibres. So yeah, paper clay is such an exciting kind of area of pottery. There's so much you can do with it. There's a really good book actually on paper clay by Rosette Galt, and that's where I learned lots about paper clay from that book, which I got out of the library, and it was really, really good. It tells you all the kind of different ratios as well. If you want to make, if you want to do sculpting, or if you want to do throwing, it tells you the kind of optimum ratios of paper to clay that you need. So that's my top tip: kitchen roll, bamboo kitchen roll. It's so good. And okay, so the next thing as well is that when I actually use my kitchen roll, I rip it up into little bits, and I add some water to it in a kind of jug of water, and then I blend it with a stick blender. So you can get stick blenders. They're actually a piece of catering equipment, and you can get them. They're quite cheap. You can just get them from the supermarket or anywhere that sells electrical goods, catering electrical goods for cooking, and they are so good for blending paper. They're also really, really good for blending glazes. If you want to really thoroughly mix a pottery glaze, electric stick blenders are so good. They just kind of mix a glaze in about 15 seconds, whereas if you're stirring it with a spoon and stuff, it can take age. It's 10 minutes or something sometimes. If you've got lots of sometimes those glazes that separate at the bottom, and they've got a lot at the bottom, they could take ages to stir up. So electric stick blenders are so good. So like I said, I use it for glazes, and I use it for blending my paper pulp before I add it to my slip, my casting slip. Oh, yeah, okay, so we better stop there. It's a lot to tell you about in terms of all the different things that you can get from, catering suppliers and garden centres and DIY shops, and so much stuff you can use in pottery, that might just be, just normal everyday items, but they work really, really well when you're hand making pottery. I'll run through the next 8 things that I use in pottery that are from, that not actually made for pottery on the next episode. And I've loved talking to you about the first 8, and I hope it's been helpful for you and stuff. And I really can't wait to see you on the next episode. And until then, wishing you very happy potting, and I can't wait to see you then. Bye bye. Thank you so much for joining me for the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Oxford Clay or eco-conscious pottery, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website. There's books, e-courses, there's a blog on there, loads of other podcast episodes, and I can't wait to share it with you. The web address is oxfordclay.co.uk. I'll see you over there.